Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to talk about Silverwolf and why I believe she's a great character that can actually be a lot better than you think and a really strong, consistent debuffer. So because of that, we're going to talk about how her kit works, how to play her, and also how to build her efficiently, covering her playstyle, but also her best icons, relics, and just everything you need to know to get the most value out of her. Before we begin though, I do want you guys to know that I stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested in watching me live, and also excuse the slight delay in this video. I really wanted to take the time to play her as much as I could once she came out on the live server, so I could actually get a better feel for the character and clear content with her and determine how good she is from testing her myself. And so with that being said, let's talk about Silverwolf. Alright, so starting things off, before we actually talk about how to build her and how good she is, we have to talk about what her kit actually does. Well, a big part of her kit comes from her ability to implant weaknesses on enemies through Silverwolf's skill. In fact, when you use your skill, there's a chance to add one weakness to a single enemy that you target of one of your team members' types. This means that if you're running a Quantum, a Lightning, and a Wind character, when you use your skill, one of these three weaknesses, either Wind, Quantum, or Lightning, will be added to whichever enemy you're fighting. The weakness that is implanted is random, but it can be manipulated relatively easily if you either build a team around it or are fighting enemies that have specific weaknesses, because Silverwolf will not implant a type that the enemy is already weak to if there's another type in your team that they're not weak to. So for example, if the enemy is weak to Quantum but not Ice, and you're running only Quantum and Ice characters in your team, then when you use your Silverwolf skill, it will always implant Ice, meaning there are ways to make this ability more consistent. With that in mind, there is still a randomness aspect to this, which we'll talk about later, but when you do implant this weakness, a few things happen. First of all, you will reduce the damage resistance by 20% of that weakness type to the enemy, so you'll just be dealing more damage of that type. If that was enough, when you use your skill, Silverwolf will also have a chance to further reduce the resistance of every type to the enemy that's hit by a decent amount, like around 10% when you have a high enough trace for 2 turns, while also dealing quantum damage on its hit. Because of that, it's a pretty good debuffing single target ability, but there is some randomness to it, as which weakness type you implant is going to be random based on the characters in your team and what weaknesses the enemy already has. Also, keep in mind that you can only implant one weakness at a time, so if you implant one and then use your skill again, it will implant a new one, which will replace the old one, or you can get the same one that you initially implanted a second time in a row, which will just refresh the duration instead. With that in mind, there are traces that make her effects a bit better, like Inject, which will increase the duration of the weakness implant by 1 more turn, so instead of being 2, it's 3, and another one that will give you 3% resistance shred to every type. And so this is a very unique ability that kind of defines how she plays, and we'll talk about how to use it and what strengths it actually has a bit later. But first, I think we should finish talking about her kit. Like, her ultimate, which is the next ability we have to talk about, is a pretty decent amount of nuke damage. It's not like as much as a hunt carry, but it's a pretty strong single target hit that also has a base chance of reducing the target enemy's defense by a pretty substantial amount. This defense shred lasts for 3 turns and is huge, as it will mean that all of your characters will deal more damage on top of the debuffs that you apply with your skill. If that was enough, Silverwolf also has a talent that will add an additional debuff to enemies every time she attacks, or at least a chance at it. Again, we'll cover these chances and if you should be building hit rate and how much you need and stuff a bit later, be it either through a basic attack, a skill, or an ultimate. There's a chance to apply one of 3 bugs, either reducing the attack, the defense, or the speed of enemies, with these last 2, defense and speed, being particularly important and a really nice passive debuff to apply onto enemies. This also means that you can get more value from her basic attacks, applying debuff by just basic attacking after you debuff enemies with your skill and ultimate, making her a more skill point efficient character, which is very important. Also, these bugs will last for 3 or 4 turns if you unlock the trace generate, which is a pretty cheap one, so you should get it, making it very efficient and allowing you to debuff enemies passively just by attacking them. Keep in mind that each attack, even though it's technically a multi-hit, will only apply 1 debuff to an enemy, either attack, defense, or speed, and then the next one will apply a different one, so it won't stack the same one, at least from the testing we've done so far, with it being a random one each time. Also, Silverwolf has a randomly good technique that can help you enter the battle while dealing quantum damage to every enemy that you're fighting, with this damage ignoring weakness type and actually being a really good way to break shields as soon as you enter the battle. In fact, the way this technique works is it'll act as if the enemies you're fighting are all weak to quantum, even if they're not, in the sense that you can enter a battle against non-quantum weak enemies and still break their shield immediately, while also dealing an okay amount of damage that will synergize with her talent, applying these bugs, debuffing enemies as soon as you enter the battle, while also being able to just fully break the shields of certain like smaller mobs to make them a lot less annoying. All right, now with that in mind, how useful is her kit? Should you pull for her? And how does she compare with characters like Pila? Well, I've re-recorded this section a few times because I tend to ramble on when I believe that the main thing that people are wondering is like, okay, Silverwolf has a ton of debuffs and she can implant weaknesses onto enemies, but how useful is it? Now, first of all, I want to say that while this implant weakness clearly is Silverwolf's like unique trademark, it's a thing that she only can do, and there are ways to play around this, and there's definitely use cases for it. I believe that people are kind of making it seem like it's the only thing she does, whereas in reality, she has a lot of other debuffs. She reduces the defense, potentially the speed, every resistance when you use your skill, and can also be skill point efficient because because once you use your skill once and you have the debuffs on enemies or the specific enemy you're fighting, the boss that you're targeting, since it is a single target ability, you can spam your basic attacks, which also have debuffs on them, albeit smaller ones, but still that allows you to be skill point efficient and make her a pretty good support. And while being able to implant a weakness onto enemies is a really big deal and a good part of her kit, even aside from this, her kit is very universally good, even if the weakness implantation isn't the main thing you're playing around. While yes, there are teams that can use this more than others, like for example, a mono team, right? You're using a ton of like lightning characters or a ton of quantum characters, whatever, and you really need the element implanted onto an enemy, or the type rather. I keep saying element because of Genshin. Or for example, you're doing Memory of Chaos, where the enemies might have a ton of weaknesses already on them, but you're like, okay, I need an ice one for my Yanqing. You can sort of play around it to where you're ensured to get ice, or you can even use your skill more than once. Let's say you implant the wrong one the first time, use your skill again, you implant the right one, and then boom, you're fine. And you get a lot of value from that. You get the resistance shred from that skill, while also getting everything else that her kit has to offer. Because of that, while yes, I believe it's a core part of her kit, I don't believe it's the only good one. And I believe some people are making it seem like you have to play a mono team with Silverwolf, or that's the only situation where she's viable. Obviously, I believe this weakness implantation has its uses in those mono teams, or if you have a carry built like Sealy, who you really want to use and you really want an enemy to have a quantum weakness. Obviously, it's nice, you reduce the resistance and it can help a lot, but I believe that the other parts of her kit, like the defense shred, the resistance shred, and the skill point efficiency, are also nice things to have, even without the extra weakness that you add. Now, granted, I do want to specify that this extra weakness you add can be useful in two extra ways that people haven't been mentioning. First of all, even if you get the wrong one and you're adding a weakness to a supportive character of yours, like a quantum one for Silverwolf, or imaginary for like Welt, or fire for like your fire main character, whatever, while yes, it isn't nearly as efficient and the resistance shred you apply isn't as useful, it still can help you whittle down their shield faster until you use your skill again and then refresh it. Another thing worth mentioning is that you can always just reset. In hard content, which is the Memory of Chaos, the Forgotten Hall, you can use your Silverwolf on the first half, and then if your skill doesn't implant the right element, you could just leave, go back in, and then clear certain chambers, certain floors that you otherwise might not have been able to clear because of this extra implantation. I get it, people don't want to play that way, but it is a nice upside that I believe is worth at least talking about. With that in mind, the way this implantation works, if you don't know, is it basically just rolls a random one based on any type you have in your team that the enemy doesn't already have a weakness to. This means you can manipulate it based on what enemy you're fighting, what weaknesses they have, or by changing your team, modifying it accordingly. Do keep in mind though that the odds are always going to be even of any type you have in your team that the enemy doesn't have a weakness to, meaning that even if you have 3 lightning characters and 1 quantum, it's still a 50-50 to apply either lightning or quantum. It won't be like 75-25. Now, to go into a bit more detail on how to actually get the most value out of Silverwolf's implantation and how to be like the most consistent with it, as I said, an important part of this is actually being flexible with your teams when you are building them. Now, this depends on the content you're doing, but if we look at the endgame content, which is the Memory of Chaos or the Forgotten Hall, you can clearly see what types the enemies are weak to. Because of that, you can build your team accordingly, change the support characters you have to fit these weaknesses, and since your Silverwolf will be guaranteed to implant a type that they're not weak to, you can force implant either the type of your carry or quantum if it rolls Silverwolves and they're not weak to quantum. What I mean by that is the following. So first of all, if we look at Bronny here, she's weak to physical, fire, and imaginary. That means that if you want to run a quantum DPS like Sealy and you play her with Silverwolf, you can guarantee this quantum implant by running a fire support and also a physical one. In this instance, anytime you use your skill on Silverwolf, since you can't implant a weakness that Bronny is already weak to, you will implant quantum 100% of the time since you have a physical and a fire support. And so while sometimes you can run staple teams, which we'll cover in the very next section, where for example, let's say the enemy is weak to lightning, you could do like a double quantum, double lightning team, which is just a generally good team. Sometimes you should adjust your supports to guarantee whichever implant you're going for. Now, with that in mind, you also have to remember that Silverwolf is a quantum support, so she can actually implant her own type. So if, for example, you're fighting Bronya and you want to implant, let's say, ice because you're playing Yanqing, well, the best you can get is a 50% chance, since there's always the chance that Silverwolf herself applies quantum. This is why Silverwolf can be more efficient or more consistent, I guess, if the enemy already has a quantum weakness, like for example this guy, where let's say you want to implant lightning, you can run 3 lightning characters with Silverwolf, and then Silverwolf will not be able to implant quantum since the enemy is already weak to quantum. And so that's kind of the gist of it. I think there are some really good like staple mono teams you can play, which we'll cover in the next section, but I also believe there's a strong case to be made of just being flexible, like genuinely, depending on the content you're doing, adjusting your supports to where instead of going, let's say Bronya Bailu here, where you have a random chance of implanting either wind, lightning, or quantum to this enemy who's not weak to any of them, you can just like change your team slightly to where you can guarantee consistently good value from your Silverwolf. And so this is just one of the reasons why I believe she can be a lot better than people are making out to be, as while yes, she has some staple like mono teams or really just good teams in general that can work across many different types of content, I believe you get the most value out of her when you start being flexible with your team depending on the content you're doing. And so overall, I think Silverwolf is a great unit. When you compare it to someone like Pila, I do want to kind of emphasize emphasize that I think Pila is a really underrated and really strong high value 4-star support who specializes in AoE defense shred. Because of that, while Pila can sometimes be better in AoE content against a lot of enemies, you have to remember that generally speaking in this game and the endgame content we have right now, it's mostly one big boss enemy and then a bunch of useless adds around them. Because of that, since single target content is so prevalent, Silverwolf gets so much value and is a really strong, not just debuffing support, but also decent like sub DPS when you actually invest into her as someone who deals good damage and has a ton of resistance shred, defense shred, and also type implantation, which I believe is a great bonus in most teams, while also enabling some other teams to be more viable. With that in mind, I think despite Silverwolf being an amazing character who definitely I think is meta, she is still replaceable in the sense that there are a lot of good support characters, there are good debuffers like Pila, who's just a low investment 4-star, or Well 2 you may have, and who can take her role, can be used instead of her. Silverwolf offers a lot of unique things in her kit, making her a great and oftentimes the best option at that specific role, the best at her job, whereas you can still replace her with someone like Pila if you don't want to pull for her. So don't feel forced to pull, but definitely a really strong support and a really versatile one if you choose to do so. And so with that in mind, I actually wanted to talk about Silverwolf's best teams and how to get the most value out of using her alongside other characters. Basically how to get the most value out of her kit, not just the global defense shred and resistance shred that I've been talking about as just a good generalistic debuffer, but also this weakness type implantation, which is the unique part of her kit. So obviously, as I said, I think she's a great debuffer in general in just any team where you can fit her. With that said though, I do think there are situations where she shines even more, and teams that are built because you have Silverwolf, teams that become more viable, team archetypes like mono or 2-element teams where you can use her and get insane amounts of value. Now, as I said, and I want to emphasize this, I think you can be flexible with your teams based on what enemies you're fighting to make sure you're implanting the right weakness, or even if you have to use your skill more than once, it can be okay. But I also think that she can enable some pretty strong mono or duo element teams because of how her implantation works. Examples of these teams include the following. First of all, since she's a quantum unit, obviously you can play a mono quantum team with Sealy. Sealy is an amazing hyper carry, and being able to fight anything that has a quantum weakness with her pretty much means you're going to be able to clear it with ease. Because of that, while we don't have a quantum healer yet, and you can't really do a 4 quantum unit team, you could do either 2 quantum with 2 of another element like lightning here, or even fire if you want to play like fire main character and Asta, or pretty much any element that can fit, or do something like run 3 quantum characters with a flex healer, or maybe in the future when we get another quantum character, you can play 4 or again 3 with a flex slot depending on the weakness of the enemies you're fighting. Again, I think being flexible with her is important, but in general, I think playing her with Sealy is a really good option. Other options include many different mono teams. Genuinely, I think she shines really well with someone like Yanqing. Yanqing is a really strong ice hunt carry who actually deals not just an insane amount of ice damage to shields that are weak to ice, but also just being a good carry and having bonus damage to enemies that have ice weakness, as you can see here, makes it to where you can shred ice shields really fast, do additional damage to enemies with ice weakness, while also just being a great hunt carry in general. So being able to implant this ice weakness with Yanqing, I think makes him even stronger than he already is. Because of that, while you could play Silverwolf in a standard team with Yanqing, you could also play a mono ice team, and Yanqing can get a lot of value out of it. Other mono teams include mono pyro with either Himiko, Hook, or both, mono physical with Clara and Sushang, or something like mono lightning with Jingyuan or Serval. Jingyuan can be really strong in this team as you have so many buffers, and a lot of these mono teams, while yeah, there's a chance you implant quantum because of Silverwolf, it's usually fine because you can just use your skill another time or reset if that's a possibility, while having some advantages of running many characters of the same element, like Tingyun having access to this light cone increasing lightning damage, or Asta giving all of your allies 18% more fire damage, making her better with multiple fire characters. Another example is some synergies here, like for example the fact that Tingyun and Bailu are just good lightning characters that you can use with anyone, which is why even doing 2 quantum 2 lightning can be good. Or for example, the benefit of Pila with Silverwolf together means insane amounts of debuff, reducing the enemy's defense to like 0 and allowing your Yanqing to pop off especially. And so yeah, I think there's a lot of either mono teams or duo element teams where Silverwolf can be sort of meta or really important to make those teams viable and strong. But also I think she's a great debuffer, which is something that people are overlooking. You can really just run her with a flexible team line against, let's say, a wind weakness enemy. You could put Bronya in and then sort of adjust your team accordingly, or run a sort of mono team with a 1 quantum character or 2 if you want to play Celia as a carry, or using her with a different element because she can enable that mono type while also being such a powerful debuffer on her own, even without the weakness type implantation, that she can be good in pretty much any team, with her strong suit being in teams where she can weakness implant for whatever your main source of damage is. All right, now with all that out of the way, how do you actually want to build your Silverwolf to get the most value out of her? Well, as I mentioned in the last section, one of the first things you should prioritize is having enough hit rate to be able to consistently land all of your debuffs onto the enemies you're fighting. This is especially true in harder content like the Memory of Chaos, where the enemies are higher level, so they have higher effect resistance, which means that you need more hit rate to consistently apply debuffs, even if the base base chance of your ability were to be like 100%, because of the way effect res works, if you don't know, you will still need more hit rates in order to actually guarantee it landing. And so making sure your Silver Wolf has enough to be a consistent debuffer is going to be incredibly important. With that said, how much hit rate you need actually isn't as much as we had previously thought. In fact, before this patch came out, high level enemies had more effect resistance, which means that you would have needed an unreasonable amount of hit rate on your Silver Wolf, namely around 135%, but now it isn't nearly as much, and the golden number of how much hit rate you want to be looking for is going to be around 96%. This will make it to where you can consistently debuff enemies of even the highest level right now, and it's typically going to be the main thing you're looking for on your Silver Wolf. Now with that in mind, since you need 96% hit rate, it's going to be a high amount and your number one priority. However, it's not an unreasonable amount, and it's actually a lot easier to achieve than you might think. In fact, when you get all of your traces, you just inherently get 18% hit rate. As you can see, 4% here, 8% here, and then another 6%, adding up to 18% hit rate for free on your traces, while also being able to get a lot more from passive things like, first of all, a hit rate body, which gives you 43%, the free-to-play event light cone, which we'll talk about in the next section, but for now, just know that it gives you 40% light cone for free as a light cone that anyone can get and use on Silver Wolf right now. If that wasn't enough, you can also run the two-piece of the Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise, which will give you 10% hit rate for free without even needing any on your substats. Because of that, you already have more hit rate than is needed just from some sort of innate thing, so it can be very easy to get enough hit rate for your Silver Wolf to be very efficient. Now with that in mind, since 96 is how much you're going for, you can kind of skip out on one of the few things that I said, either go a more offensive one like crit or attack on your body, or going for a different light cone, although the event one is really good, but more on that in the next section, or being able to do other things like changing your last two piece, but typically being able to go for another body or more offensive stats instead of needing an absurd amount of hit rate, since it's 96% is honestly really achievable despite it being a high amount, is a really good thing for Silver Wolf. And so with that in mind, what are you looking for on this character? Well, once you have enough hit rate, you can start looking into more offensive stats. Things like speed, crit rate, and crit damage, and also attack percent are all going to be great for your Silver Wolf to maximize her damage and also obviously her speed, which is very important as a support character. And so that's what you're going to be looking for on all of your substats alongside effect hit rate to make sure you're getting enough. For your body, for most players, I would recommend just slapping hit rate, but once you start really investing a lot into your Silver Wolf, especially if your light cone gives you hit rate, and if you have some on your substats, you can honestly get away with a crit body, either crit rate or crit damage, assuming you have enough hit rate on your substats and through other sources to get that 96% that you're after. While initially we thought it wouldn't be as viable to go for a crit body, now since you only need 96% hit rate, it is a lot more viable and a more meta option to make sure you're not over capping on hit rate, assuming you have enough from external sources. So for most players, just go hit rate, but once you start investing a lot and get later in the game, you can start looking into using a crit body and trying to get the extra hit rate you need on your substats. For your boots, you want either speed or attack, with speed being the generalistic option to be able to go faster and get more turns in, and you also want to be able to go first to like debuff enemies before all of your team starts attacking. So speed is really important for your boots and what I recommend. And then for your last two pieces, I would recommend going for quantum damage on your sphere and energy regen on your rope. The reason I'm saying it and not showing it is because unfortunately I don't have the best stats right now on this set because I haven't farmed it enough, but quantum damage bonus will obviously be the best for maximizing your damage. But if you don't have one, you can go attack for the time being. And similarly for rope, while attack percent is nice and fine for your personal damage, energy regen will typically be more efficient just to make sure you're getting your ultimate back when you need it, to make sure that the defense shred from your ultimate has 100% uptime, and to allow you to just ult as often as possible. And so now that we talked about what stats you want to Silver Wolf, let's now talk about the sets that you're looking for. Typically I start with sets, but in this instance I feel it's important to understand what stats you're looking for, because the most important thing is to have enough hit rate and then also have a good amount of speed and energy, and then you can start looking into damage. But these things are really important to get on your stats, even if you have to go offset or aren't running the most optimal sets. The reason for this is because having enough hit rate and being able to go fast are more important than getting a slightly better set effect than another one you might have with worse stats. Furthermore, I do think that for relic sets, we will probably be getting a better supportive one, like a dedicated support set in the future, because as of right now, while there are definitely good relic sets for her, none of them really scream Silver Wolf other than maybe the quantum set to just maximize her damage, although it doesn't really do much in terms of like a supportive set. Overall though, to maximize her damage, go for the 4-piece of the quantum set to ignore some defense and increase your quantum damage. Or if you just want to give her some attack and some speed, the 4-piece of musketeer giving 6% speed and then some attack percent is also a decent option, especially as one that you can get passively just from doing other things like weekly bosses and opening chests. It's also an excellent early game set, but if you have the spare resources and are investing a lot in your Silver Wolf, then going for the quantum set is definitely the way to go. Other sets I thought I should mention that typically aren't optimal but that you can use include the break effect set if you're playing a break effect team, or the win set if you want to advance your action forward after your ultimate, but typically this isn't as recommended as either just getting speed from musketeer or getting a ton of damage from the quantum set. Overall though, as I said, be sure to just look for substats and main stats over picking your set, because having enough hit rate and other stats are typically going to be more important than a good set effect, at least as of right now. With that in mind, for your planet ornament, the 2Bs can actually be very important even if you don't have the best stats on them right now, because the Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise can help give you a free 10% hit rate just from having the 2Bs. This can be a 4-star 2Bs or a 5-star 2Bs, and this 10% hit rate alongside almost 25% attack for free is going to be a really big amount of stats. In fact, you gain 25% of your effect hit rate as attack percent up to a maximum of 25%, and since you'll be having 96% hit rate or close to 100%, you'll be getting around 24 to 25% attack for free on top of a free 10% hit rate, so a really good 2-piece to look for. With that in mind, since as we saw, you can over cap on hit rate from external sources, like if you run a hit rate body and a hit rate light cone, you could actually go for a different 2-piece if you already farmed another one, as it could be more efficient stamina wise to farm something like Inert Salsodo and use it for a bit more damage, as it's the set that you may already have for other characters. You could also use Fleet of the Ageless if you want to give your party 8% attack, which can be a nice supportive set, or even Space Stealing Station for some personal attack, although this won't be as good as Commercial Enterprise, which obviously will give you the same amount of attack but also a free 10% hit rate. So overall, to not make this too confusing, just go for Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise. But if you don't want to farm it or already have enough hit rate and, as I said, don't want to spend the stamina on it, then you could go for any of the other sets that I mentioned as a viable but typically less efficient alternative. All right, now with her best stats and stuff out of the way, let's actually get into what light cones you want to use on Silverwolf, as it should be easier to explain now. In fact, what everyone should be happy to hear is that Silverwolf has an amazing and accessible free-to-play light cone that you can get through an event this patch, which is going to be called Before the Tutorial Mission. This light cone you can get and fully superimpose for free, which will then give you 40% effect hit rate on its effect and 8 energy every time you attack an enemy whose defense reduced, which is something that Silverwolf can do easily. And so what this will do is give you energy back on every hit and give you some much needed effect hit rate. While before the effect hit rate changes of this patch, you needed a lot more than you currently do, still getting this 40% is going to be very crucial to help you hit that 96 or so threshold that you want, or however much hit rate you're going for, to consistently be able to debuff enemies all the time, making it an amazing free-to-play option, and one that's also just good even if you have other options, because hit rate is amazing and energy is also amazing, because without this light cone, it can be hard for you to get your ultimate back when you need it, even within like 2 or 3 turns. So being able to regen this energy to get 100% uptime on your ultimate and just have it when you need it is really nice, on top of the hit rate, which is the best part of it. 40% hit rate is amazing, so definitely a really recommendable light cone for any Silverwolf player. With that in mind, there are some other options you can use, especially now that her hit rate is a more reasonable amount, despite it still being a high one, like notably her signature 5-star light cone, which is typically going to be her best slot. Incessant Rain will give you 24% hit rate on its effect at superimposition level 1, while also giving you 12% crit rate against enemies that are debuffed, and then a separate debuff on it that will apply when you use your basic attack, skill, or ultimate, making whichever enemy you hit take 12% increased damage for 1 turn. This increase in damage is huge for your overall team's DPS, because it's another debuff that means that any other character you use or your Silverwolf herself will get more damage when they attack them. Because of that, it's just a really good generalistic light cone, which is typically her best in slot overall. With that said, if you don't have enough hit rate, the event light cone can sometimes still be preferred, or at least such a good free-to-play option that you may not want to pull for this light cone, especially because you also really need energy with Silverwolf in order to get her burst back at least within 3 turns, to where the event light cone can just be the most convenient and consistent option. With that in mind, the 5-star light cone is something that I would more recommend once you have your second Eidolon, and while we'll cover her Eidolons in the very next section, her E1 will give you energy and her E2 will give you effect res shred, so making you need less hit rate, and without them, while this can still be your best in slot, it won't be as recommended of a pull, because you can just use her free-to-play event light cone, which is amazing and what I generally recommend. But yeah, obviously her best in slot will be her signature light cone for a team buff, some hit rate, and also some crit rate. Other light cones that are good include Wealth's signature 5-star one for just a ton of damage and also some hit rate, the light cone with Luca's sexy back, which is a really good generalistic light cone to reduce the defense of enemies, but doesn't give you any hit rate, so it's less applicable to Silverwolf. Still really good because the defense reduction is a separate debuff that will stack with her other ones, so a good option if you have enough hit rate, but chances are you want more hit rate on her, so I would typically recommend the event light cone or her signature, but it can definitely still be a viable option if you have enough hit rate. Other options include Good Night and Sleep Well for personal damage, Eyes of the Prey for 40% hit rate if you don't have the event light cone, but it's typically just a strictly worse version of it, so I don't recommend it. And if you want a 3-star, you can technically use Void, but again, since this free-to-play Before the Tutorial Mission event light cone exists, just use that one, generally speaking, as a 4-star option, with her signature light cone or Wealth's light cone being good 5-star options if you choose to get them or already have them. Overall though, I'm really happy that everyone has access to a great Silverwolf option, with there also being potential to pull for a better one for more damage but a bit less consistency, at least until you have enough hit rate and enough energy, or her first 2 Eidolons. Now in fact, to talk about Silverwolf's Eidolons, which I mentioned in the last section, you should know that she's a great character even at E0, and that's most of the reason why I'm making this video, but she definitely has some significant upgrades if you want to get them, especially some early ones like her 1st and 2nd second Eidolon, which give you a ton of value. In fact, your second Eidolon decreases the effect resistance of enemies by 20%, allowing you to run like half as much effect hit rate and play her more as a sub DPS, allowing you to invest a lot more in crit, speed, and attack, and not as much in hit rate. Your first Eidolon will also give you a ton of energy when you use your ultimate, up to 35 energy if the enemy is debuffed 5 times, which is just really nice and helps you get your ultimate back way more consistently. Moving on, her third and fifth Eidolon will increase your trace levels, and then your fourth Eidolon will give you an additional scaling onto your ultimate, dealing 20% of Silverwolf's attack onto the enemy for every debuff that they have, so up to an additional 100% of her attack, which is okay. And then her E6 is a really good one, where instead of giving you another hit scaling on her attack, it will increase the damage of your entire kit by 20% for each debuff the enemy has, again stacking up to 5 times with a limit of 100% damage increase, which is obviously a great E6 for her personal damage, making it one of the stronger sources of single target damage. With that in mind though, you definitely don't have to wail to make this character efficient. Even at E0, she's a really great debuffer, and then if you want to get early Eidolons, getting her first 2 can be a smart thing to do as well if you have some spare jades or really like her. Overall though, I really do like Silverwolf. I think she's a great debuffer, a very universal one with a unique kit, but one that is pretty good in any team where you can fit her, and who can change actually the direction of your team and your playstyle. Because of that, I really hope this guide and video was helpful. Again, excuse the slight delay on it, but I hope you enjoyed it and I hope it was helpful nonetheless. If there's anything new I want to add, as always, it will be in a pinned comment, so be sure to look out for that. And with all that being said, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.